The fever finally breaks through, or the flu finally knocks you flat, and underneath the actual discomfort of being sick, there is a strange and slightly uncomfortable relief, an odd sense of finally being allowed to stop. Nobody expects anything from you right now. Nobody can accuse you of laziness or lack of discipline, because a body running a real fever has an ironclad excuse that ordinary tiredness, ordinary burnout, ordinary need for rest never quite seems to earn on its own. You would never admit this out loud, but some part of you has been quietly waiting for an illness just to finally have permission to lie down. Carl Jung had a genuine explanation for why physical illness can function as the only socially acceptable rest a certain kind of person ever allows themselves. Jung believed that certain deeply held internal rules about worthiness and productivity, rules formed early and rarely questioned consciously, make it genuinely difficult for a person to grant themselves rest based on their own internal signals of exhaustion alone. Fatigue, sadness, ordinary burnout, these feel, to a person carrying this specific rule, like insufficient justification for actually stopping. Physical illness, though, arrives with an external undeniable authority that these internal rules cannot argue with. A fever is a fever. A body that cannot physically function is not being lazy, and this external unambiguous validation finally grants the permission to rest that the person's own internal signals, however loudly they had been quietly asking for the exact same thing, were never allowed to grant on their own. This explains why the relief specifically accompanies illness rather than ordinary tiredness, since illness is the one condition that bypasses the internal argument entirely. Nobody, including the person who is sick, can accuse a genuine fever of secretly being weakness or a lack of discipline, and this makes illness, strangely, one of the only liably guilt-free forms of rest available to someone whose internal rules otherwise demand constant productivity and constant justification for stopping. If you recognize this feeling in yourself, hear this clearly. Feeling relief at finally being sick enough to rest is not evidence that you secretly want to be unwell, and it is not some strange or shameful reaction to have. It is genuine important information about how difficult it currently is for you to grant yourself rest under any other, less externally validated circumstance, and this information deserves real attention rather than only quiet embarrassment the next time it happens. Here is what actually helps, and it involves deliberately practicing the exact permission that illness currently provides, but without needing to actually be sick first. It helps to identify honestly what specific internal rule currently prevents you from resting on ordinary fatigue alone, and to deliberately test, in a small and low-stakes way, whether taking genuine rest without an external undeniable justification like illness actually produces the disaster your internal rule seems to predict. Choosing one ordinary non instead, to simply rest, without guilt, and observing directly that the world does not actually fall apart, builds real evidence against a rule that has likely never actually been tested honestly before. There is a second thing worth doing, deliberately. It helps to notice, specifically, what your body and mind actually need during rest, and to try providing some version of that same care during ordinary fatigue, not waiting for illness to grant permission, but consciously extending the same quality of care to yourself on an ordinary difficult day that you would automatically grant yourself the moment a fever arrived. Think honestly about the last time you felt a strange relief at finally being sick enough to rest, and consider what internal rule about productivity or worthiness has been preventing you from granting that same rest to yourself under ordinary circumstances. Right below the single word for what you most need permission to do without first requiring a fever to justify it. Naming it and then actually testing that permission on an ordinary day is the real and practical way you finally stop needing illness to be the only acceptable reason to rest. Because feeling relieved the moment you finally get sick enough to rest was never, according to Carl Jung's understanding, some strange or shameful reaction. It was genuine evidence of an internal rule that has made ordinary rest feel unjustified, one that deserves to finally be tested and, in most cases, retired.